Welcome to another Studio course. In this video we're going to cover adding and resizing boxes, adding styling to boxes, and applying corner radiuses. Let's start off with adding and resizing boxes. So we're starting off with a blank web page, and you can see in my Elements panel I can drag and add a box in any one of these 9 areas on the web page. I'll just pin it on the top here. And we can resize this very easily by just clicking on one of these nodes and dragging the width or the height. We can also see those values change here, and if I want to add precise values, I can double click into this field and I'll add 900 pixels, and let's add 400 pixel height. And we can also come over here into the pixel value and we can change this to percentage value, and we can see here now that we have 80% pixel value, and I can change this to 50% if I'd like, or 60%, and this applies to be 60% of the web page. Now let's talk about styling, and before we do that, I'm going to drag this to be 100% of the web page, and then I'm going to add another box inside of this box, so I can pin it in one of these 9 areas. I'm going to pin this here to the center, and let's resize this, something like this. And we can simply change the color here by going into the top bar, and we can add a white fill, and that looks nice. And we can also select any one of these colors here in our presets. So if I want this box to be blue, for example, I can change that. And I can also fine-tune the color selection by increasing or decreasing the brightness or the saturation. And if I have something that I like, I can also add this here into the presets so that I can use this later on. If there are any colors that I'm not using, I can click on this X icon and get rid of that in the colors panel. Now we can also see these red, green, blue values, these RGB values. We can change these specific values and also this alpha value. This is how transparent the color is. Or if we click on these arrows here, this will change to the hex value. So we can change this hex value. Let's say we want F3, 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 and hit return. That's a nice gray. And if we change this to be a darker gray, we can see that hex value change as well. Now if we want this box to have a gradient color, we can click over here on the gradient icon, and let's click over here, this left color here. We want this to be a shade of blue. And then the color over here to the right, let's change this to be, we like this white, but we can also change the opacity here. So if we scale this down to 100% transparency, and now we can start to see the box behind it bleeding through. If we want to change the direction of this gradient, we can come in here and hover on this arrow, and if we just drag, we can rotate this arrow so that our gradient is going from the top left to the bottom right, for example. And we can also click on one of these circles outside of the arrow to have an exact value like 0 degrees, 90 degrees, 180 degrees. We can get those here as well. I'm actually going to make this box blue here. We're going to click on this preset, and I can click on this box outside of here. I'm just going to make this light blue. Now if I want to add a border to this box, I can come over here into borders. I can add a 5 pixel border here to the right side, and I can do the same thing over here to the left side. But if we want to lock these values on all 4 sides, we can click on this icon here, and now we have a locked value where we can change this. Let's say 20 pixels or 5 pixels. We can change that on all 4 sides. Now we can also change the color of this to white, so I'm going to change this to be white. And we can set the styling too. If we want it to be dashed, dotted, or have 2 lines, we can change this here. So I think I'm liking the styling that we have so far. And let's set the opacity now. I'm going to set the opacity to 0.5. So if it has a 50% opacity, that means 50% of the background is bleeding through. And we can change this back to maybe 0.9. And last thing we want to do is add a shadow to this box. So we can come over here into the shadows properties. We can see that we have some nice presets. So if we click on one of these, it automatically applies a nice subtle preset, and we can choose a more harsh preset. And if we want to start with one of these presets, we can do that, and we can either change the values here. For example, if I want the shadow to be 50 pixels to the right, I'm going to change the X value to be 50 pixels over here to the right. If I want it to be 50 pixels down, I'm going to change the Y value to be 50 pixels down, and we can see how that's moved. And we can also increase the blur, so I can increase this to 20 pixels to get it to be very blurry. And we want the spread, I'm going to make this really dramatic. So if the spread was 200 pixels, we can see that there's 200 pixels around this box applying that spread. So this is really dramatic. I'm going to change this back down to 10 so we can see this a little bit more clearly. And another thing that we can do is we can use this box here to change this by dragging and dropping. And this is changing the X, Y, and blur values all at once. Now, if you don't want to manipulate the blur value along with the X and Y value, you can unlock this by clicking on this lock right here. And now only the X and Y value are applied when you're dragging around. And you can change the blur value independently by clicking on this circle and increasing or decreasing this blur. Now, one last thing I want to talk about with shadows is we can apply a shadow inset. So if we click on this inset checkbox here, we can see that that shadow comes from the outside and comes in. So now we have 11 pixels and 6 pixels here on the inside, and that's applied as if this box is cut out from this box. It's a really nice effect that you can apply through your web templates. Now I'm going to uncheck that box and apply this back on the outside, and the last thing we want to cover is applying corner radiuses. So if we see here on the top, we can apply a corner radius by just typing in 30 pixels, or we can choose any of these values here if we want. So 40 pixels, for example. And if we want to play around with the radius value, we can actually click on this circle here on the top left, and we can just drag this up and down to get a nice pixel value that we want. And watch what happens if I drag this all the way to the right. We can see that now it applies a 50% radius, and that's here at the bottom, 50%. And all that's going to do is create an ellipse out of our box. So if we drag this out, we can see a nice ellipse, or if we drag this in, we can turn this into a circle. So we've covered adding and resizing boxes, adding styling to boxes, and applying corner radiuses. Now let's take a look at a website template and see how these styles are applied to make a really nice looking template. As we take a look at this template here, we can see a lot of styling applied. And I want to show you what's going on in the back end. We have this contact button, for example. I'm going to click a few times until I can select this contact button. And if I go over here into the box tab of the top bar, we can see that there's a 40 pixel radius applied, and that's how you get these nice circles on the ends. So we can change this here, and you can see that changing live as we're dragging this. Also, if I want to change this to 50%, we get that ellipse again. So I'm going to change this back to 40, and we can also resize this box if we'd like. And we also notice that this has a border, so there's a 2 pixel white border around this box. And that's how they style a button. Now let's take a look at this blue styled box. I'm going to resize this a little bit so we can see some elements in the background. And we can see that there's an image behind this blue box. And because this box color has a 90% opacity applied to it, we can see the image behind it bleeding through. If we want to change that, we can drag the controls here and set the opacity. And we can also change this color to red if we'd like. And let's drag this back out. And we can alter the styling to meet our tastes. Let's scroll down a little bit lower, and I want to show you a few other styles that are applied to boxes. Now, as you can see, there's 4 icons here that are grouped by circles, but these actually aren't circles. If we double click a few times to drill into this box, we can see that this actually is a box, and I can change this to be a 0 pixel border radius, and we can see that that's now a box. And so all this is a box that has that radius applied, 50% radius, that will turn that into a circle. Now this page shows just a few examples of how you can add styling to boxes to create a really robust template. And I'd highly advise you to look at some of the templates here inside of Studio and take a look at how those styles are applied to get that desired effect.